Jake Morrison had been pushing the same yellow mop bucket down the corridors of the Celestial Harmony for nearly 3 years now. Tonight was no different from any other Tuesday night, or at least that's what he thought when his shift started at 10 p.m. The massive space station floated in the neutral zone between a dozen different star systems, serving as the galaxy's most important diplomatic hub. Politicians, ambassadors, and representatives from species Jake couldn't even pronounce came here to argue, negotiate, and occasionally sign treaties that would shape the future of entire civilizations. But Jake wasn't part of any of that important stuff. He was just the night shift janitor, one of only 3 humans working on a station that housed thousands of aliens. And honestly, he preferred it that way. The daytime shift was chaos. Aliens everywhere, speaking in languages that sounded like everything from whale songs to grinding metal. Some communicated through color-changing skin, others through chemical smells that made Jake's eyes water. A few didn't communicate at all in ways humans could understand, which made asking them to move so he could mop under their feet pretty much impossible. But at night? At night, the station belonged to Jake. The diplomats were sleeping or doing whatever their species did to rest. The hallways were empty and quiet. Just Jake, his mop, his bucket, and the old songs his daddy used to play during road trips back home in Tennessee. Tonight he was humming Johnny Cash. Ring of Fire echoed softly off the metal walls as Jake worked his way through the main corridor. He had his headphones in one ear. Station regulation said he had to keep one ear free in case of emergencies, but mostly he just sang to himself. His voice wasn't anything special. A little rough around the edges, kind of like gravel mixed with honey, but it made the lonely hours pass faster. Jake had grown up in a small town outside Nashville where everybody knew everybody else's business. Coming to space had been his way of escaping all that. Out here, nobody cared about his past. Nobody asked questions. He was invisible, and that suited him just fine. The aliens barely noticed him anyway. To most of them, humans were still newcomers to the galactic community, not worth much attention. A janitor even less so. He moved methodically through his route, the same one he'd followed for 1,000 nights. Start at the docking bay, work through the diplomatic quarters, hit the medical wing around 2 a.m., then finish up at the observation deck before his shift ended at 6. The medical wing was always his least favorite part. Something about hospitals, even alien ones, gave him the creeps. Too clean, too quiet, too much like the place where his mama had spent her last days. But it was part of the job, so he pushed his bucket through the automatic doors and started mopping. He didn't know that behind one of those sealed medical suite doors, Princess Velshera of the Kethrii Empire was dying. Had no clue that the elegant alien woman with skin that glowed like a sunset had been lying in that bed for 17 days without proper sleep. Didn't know that her people's most brilliant doctors had tried everything they could think of to help her, and all of it had failed. Jake just mopped and hummed, working his way down the hallway while Johnny Cash gave way to Folsom Prison Blues in his repertoire. He had a whole mental playlist of old country songs, stuff his daddy had played on vinyl records until the grooves wore thin. Each song carried memories. Summer barbecues, fishing trips, his mama dancing barefoot in the kitchen. The medical wing took him about 40 minutes to clean. He finished up around 2:15 a.m., gave the floors one last inspection to make sure they were properly dried, and moved on to his next section. Another night, another shift, another collection of corridors that would just get dirty again tomorrow. What Jake didn't see was the sudden flurry of activity that erupted in Princess Velshera's medical suite about 10 minutes after he'd started mopping. Doctors and nurses, if you could call the Kethrii medical staff that, had rushed to her bedside, their own bioluminescent skin flashing in patterns that indicated shock and excitement. For the first time in over 2 weeks, the princess's vital signs had stabilized. Her breathing, which had been shallow and irregular for days, had suddenly smoothed out into the deep, steady rhythm of genuine sleep. The chaotic light patterns flickering across her skin had calmed to a slow, peaceful pulse. Every monitor in the room showed improvement. Heart rate, brain activity, cellular regeneration, all of it. The medical team worked frantically to figure out what had changed. They checked every piece of equipment, analyzed the air quality, reviewed the medication dosages, scanned for environmental changes. They found nothing. Absolutely nothing was different from 5 minutes ago when the princess had been deteriorating. By 3 a.m., Jake was 2 sections away, humming Waylon Jennings while mopping the observation deck. He paused for a moment to look out at the stars, something he did every night. Space still amazed him even after 3 years. All those worlds out there, all those different kinds of life, all those stories he'd never hear. He checked his watch. Another 3 hours until shift end. Another 3 hours of solitude and old songs and the simple satisfaction of turning dirty floors clean. Back in the medical wing, Princess Velshera's condition was deteriorating again. Whatever miracle had occurred at 2 a.m. was reversing itself. Her breathing became labored, her light patterns erratic. The medical staff watched helplessly as their patient slipped back toward the edge of death, and they had no idea why she'd improved or why she was declining again. They didn't make the connection. How could they? The idea that a human janitor humming country music could affect a HFY princess's health was so absurd that it wouldn't occur to anyone. But the medical computers logged everything, including the exact timestamps of the princess's improvement and decline. Those logs would sit in the system, waiting for someone smart enough to notice the pattern. Someone who would see what seemed impossible and have the courage to test it anyway. Jake finished his shift at 6 a.m., clocked out, and headed back to his tiny quarters in the station's residential section. He microwaved some leftover pizza, took a shower, and fell into bed without any idea that he'd just saved an alien princess's life. Tomorrow night he'd do it all again. Same bucket, same mop, same songs. That's how life worked for Jake Morrison, and he was perfectly fine with that. At least he was fine with it until everything changed. Dr. Rachel Hayes had been staring at medical data for so long that her eyes felt like sandpaper. As the chief xenobiologist on the Celestial Harmony, she'd seen plenty of weird cases, but Princess Velshera's condition had her completely stumped. The HFY princess was dying, and nobody could figure out why or how to stop it. Rachel had known Jake for about 2 years now. They'd met in the station cafeteria during one of those odd hours when the night shift overlapped with the early morning crew. Jake had been eating breakfast while she'd been having dinner, and they'd struck up a conversation about how strange it was to live on a schedule that made no sense to Earth time. Since then, they'd become friends in that casual way people do when they're both outsiders in a strange place. She rubbed her temples and pulled up the medical logs again. There had to be something she was missing. Some pattern, some clue, some tiny detail that would explain why the princess kept having these brief periods of improvement followed by rapid decline. That's when she saw it. The timestamp. 2:07 a.m. Princess Velshera's vitals had suddenly stabilized at 2:07 a.m. Rachel frowned and scrolled down. At 3:15 a.m. she'd gotten worse again. Rachel pulled up the previous night's data. There it was again. Improvement at 2:05 a.m., decline at 3:20 a.m. She went back further, checking every night for the past week. The pattern held. Every single night, sometime between 2 and 2:30 a.m., the princess would improve for about an hour, then crash again. What happens at 2 a.m.? Rachel muttered to herself. She pulled up the station's activity logs, cross-referencing them with the medical data. Most of the station was asleep at that hour. Minimal staff, no scheduled events, no construction or maintenance work that would affect the medical wing. Wait, maintenance? Rachel's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up the cleaning schedules. Jake Morrison, night shift janitor, assigned to the medical wing from 2 a.m. to 2:45 a.m. No way, she said out loud. That's impossible. But the timestamps matched perfectly. Every time Jake was in that corridor, the princess improved. Every time he left, she got worse. Rachel checked the data 3 more times, convinced she'd made a mistake. She hadn't. The next night, Rachel was waiting in the medical wing at 1:45 a.m. when Jake pushed his mop bucket through the doors. "Hey Rachel," he said, looking surprised. "You're here late. Everything okay?" "Jake, I need you to do me a favor, and I need you to not ask questions until after." Jake raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." "Just trust me. Come over here." Rachel led him to a small equipment room she'd converted into a makeshift laboratory. She'd set up sound recording devices, frequency analyzers, and half a dozen other pieces of equipment that Jake didn't recognize. "What's all this?" "I told you no questions yet. Just hum something. Anything. Whatever you normally hum when you're working." Jake looked at her like she'd lost her mind, but he shrugged and started humming. He picked Folsom Prison Blues, because it was stuck in his head from the night before. The machines immediately lit up, displays showing waveforms and frequency patterns that made Rachel's breath catch. "Keep going," she said, her voice tight with excitement. Jake hummed for about 2 minutes while Rachel recorded everything. When he stopped, she was already analyzing the data, her fingers moving so fast across the keyboard that they were practically a blur. "Okay, I hummed. Now can you tell me what's going on?" Rachel turned to face him, and her expression was somewhere between amazed and terrified. "Jake, do you know what a HFY song cave is?" "Hey, what?" "On the HFY homeworld, there are these natural cave formations. Wind and water flow through them in specific ways, creating sound frequencies that are essential to HFY biology. Their eggs won't develop properly without exposure to these frequencies, and adults need periodic exposure to stay healthy. Princess Velshera has been away from her homeworld too long, and without those frequencies, her body is shutting down. That's awful, but what does it have to do with me humming? Rachel pulled up two waveform displays side by side. This is a recording from a HFY song Cave. And this is you humming Johnny Cash. Look at the frequency patterns. Jake looked. He didn't really understand what he was seeing, but even he could tell the patterns looked remarkably similar. Your voice, Jake. When you hum, your vocal cords produce subsonic frequencies that almost perfectly match the song Caves. The slight variations in your pitch, the vibrato, the breathing patterns, all of it creates the exact frequencies the princess needs to survive. Jake sat down heavily on a lab stool. You're telling me I've been accidentally keeping an alien princess alive by humming country music? That's exactly what I'm telling you. The HFY doctors have been trying to synthesize these frequencies with machines, but they're too precise, too perfect. Human vocal cords are organic. We breathe, we vary our pitch slightly, we add emotion to sound without even thinking about it. Those imperfections are what make it work. This is insane. I know. But I can prove it. The princess's improvement times match your cleaning schedule exactly. Every single night. Rachel pulled up the correlation data, showing Jake the undeniable pattern. Jake stared at the screens trying to process what he was hearing. So what happens now? Now I have to tell the HFY medical team that their most advanced technology failed where a janitor from Tennessee succeeded by accident. They're going to love that. She wasn't wrong. When Rachel presented her findings to Ambassador Thalera and the HFY medical staff the next morning, the reaction was immediate and hostile. The ambassador's skin flashed angry patterns of red and orange, and the doctor's bioluminescence flickered with what Rachel had learned meant indignation. You suggest, Ambassador Thalera said through the translation device, that our finest scientists, our most sophisticated equipment, our centuries of medical knowledge, all failed where a human maintenance worker succeeded through random chance? I'm not suggesting it, Rachel said calmly. I'm proving it. Look at the data. The correlation is undeniable. Jake's voice produces the frequencies Princess Velshera needs. Impossible. Humans are barely capable of space travel. Your species has been part of the galactic community for less than a generation. You cannot possess biological capabilities we lack. It's not about capability, Ambassador. It's about biology. Human vocal cords are structured differently than yours. We evolved to create complex verbal communication with emotional nuance. That evolutionary quirk happens to produce frequencies similar to your song Caves. It's coincidence, not superiority. The HFY head physician, an older male whose name Rachel couldn't pronounce, studied the data carefully. His light patterns shifted from angry red to contemplative purple. The hypothesis has merit, he admitted. We should test it. They ran controlled experiments. Jake hummed outside Princess Velshera's sealed medical suite while every monitoring device the HFY possessed tracked her response. Within 3 minutes of Jake starting Ring of Fire, the princess's vital signs began improving. Her light patterns smoothed, her breathing deepened, her cellular regeneration accelerated. When Jake stopped humming, she began declining again within 10 minutes. They tested it 5 more times over the next 2 hours. The results were identical every time. Jake's voice worked. The evidence was impossible to deny. Ambassador Thalera's light patterns showed resignation. How often would the human need to provide these frequencies? Based on the princess's current condition, the physician said, approximately 2 hours per day should stabilize her enough to complete the negotiations. Everyone turned to look at Jake, who was leaning against the wall looking completely overwhelmed. So, he said slowly, you want me to sing a princess to sleep every night? Essentially yes, Rachel confirmed. And this is the only way to save her life? The only way we've found that works. Jake thought about the princess dying, about the peace treaty that would collapse without her, about the war that might follow. He thought about how weird his life had become in the space of 24 hours. Then he shrugged. All right. But I'm still mopping. And somebody needs to explain to Coordinator Plex that I'm going to need to adjust my cleaning schedule. Jake's life went from peacefully invisible to absolutely ridiculous in less than 48 hours. It started with the guards. 2 massive HFY warriors, each standing about 7 feet tall with skin that glowed like sunset, now followed Jake everywhere. And when Jake said everywhere, he meant everywhere. They stood outside the bathroom while he used it. They flanked him in the cafeteria while he ate his breakfast. They walked 3 steps behind him while he pushed his mop bucket down the corridors. Guys, seriously, Jake said on the third morning of this arrangement. I'm mopping the cargo bay. Nobody's going to attack me next to a bunch of supply crates. The guards didn't respond. They couldn't, actually. Neither of them spoke standard, and Jake didn't speak HFY. Their communication consisted mostly of Jake talking and them doing whatever they wanted anyway. Their bioluminescent patterns would pulse in ways that Rachel had tried to explain meant things like respectful acknowledgement or protective concern. But to Jake, it just looked like a light show. Trying to clean with two giant glowing bodyguards watching his every move made Jake feel like he was performing in some weird space circus. But the guards were just the beginning. Word had spread through the celestial harmony faster than gossip in a small town. The human janitor who could cure alien royalty with country music became the hottest topic on the station. Aliens who'd never given Jake a second glance now stopped him in corridors. A Vraxian scientist had cornered him outside his quarters, speaking rapidly through a translation device about vocal cord analysis and frequency modulation. Jake had nodded politely and escaped as soon as possible. A Tellurian journalist offered him the equivalent of 6 months' salary for an exclusive interview. A group of Xinthian medical students wanted to observe him humming, taking notes like he was some kind of fascinating specimen. I'm just a janitor, Jake kept saying, but nobody seemed to hear him. Coordinator Plex, the station's administrator, had called Jake into his office on the 4th day. Plex was a Vexillian, which meant he looked sort of like a gray octopus in a business suit, and he was having what Jake's mama would have called a full-blown conniption fit. Morrison, do you understand the diplomatic implications of this situation? Plex's tentacles waved frantically as he spoke, his translator device struggling to keep up. The princess's health is essential to these peace negotiations. The entire HFY treaty depends on her being well enough to complete the talks. And now the success of those talks depends entirely on whether or not you continue humming for 2 hours each night. I know, sir. That's why I'm doing it. But what if something happens to you? What if you become ill? What if you decide to quit? What if you demand unreasonable compensation? We have no contingency plans, no backup options, no. Sir, Jake interrupted. I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to ask for money. I'm just going to keep doing what I've been doing. It's really not that complicated. But apparently it was that complicated. Because 5 days after Jake became the galaxy's most famous janitor, someone tried to kill him. Jake had been walking back to his quarters after his shift, tired and ready for sleep. The guards were with him as always, walking 3 steps behind. The corridor was empty at 6:30 in the morning. Most of the station was either asleep or just waking up. That's when the explosion happened. The blast came from behind, from a section Jake had walked past just seconds before. The force of it threw him forward, and he hit the floor hard, his ears ringing. The guards were on him instantly, their bodies covering his as debris rained down. Alarms started blaring and emergency lights flickered on. Jake's first thought was that something had malfunctioned. Space stations had equipment failures sometimes. But then he saw the scorch marks on the wall, the pattern of the damage, and he realized this wasn't an accident. Security Chief Davis arrived within 2 minutes, her team already scanning the area. Davis was from Detroit, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd been running station security for 10 years. She took one look at the blast pattern and her expression turned grim. Somebody planted a small explosive device, she said, helping Jake to his feet. Designed to look like an equipment malfunction, but it wasn't. Morrison, someone just tried to kill you. Jake's legs felt weak. Why would anyone want to kill me? I mop floors and hum. That's it. Rachel showed up 15 minutes later, out of breath from running. Jake, are you okay? I heard there was an explosion. I'm fine. Confused but fine. Davis pulled up security footage on her tablet, showing it to both of them. We've identified 3 suspects, all connected to fringe groups opposed to the HFY peace treaty. They figured out that if they eliminate Morrison, the princess's health fails, and the negotiations collapse. That's insane, Jake said. Starting a war by killing a janitor? War makes some people very rich, Davis replied. Weapons manufacturers, military contractors, certain shipping companies that profit from conflict zones. These groups have a vested interest in keeping the HFY and Vraxians fighting. You're the only thing standing in their way. Jake sat down on a cargo crate, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I just wanted to clean floors in space. That was the whole plan. Clean floors, be invisible, maybe see some cool alien planets on my days off. Yeah, well, that plan's shot to hell, Rachel said, sitting next to him. Jake, you're a target now. These people won't stop with one attempt. So what do I do? Quit. Let the princess die? Of course not. But we need to increase your security. Change your routines. Maybe move you to more secure quarters. The next few days were even worse. Jake's tiny quarters were replaced with a suite in the diplomatic section. Bigger and fancier, sure, but it felt like a prison. Guards were posted outside his door around the clock. His movements were restricted to essential areas only. No more wandering the observation deck during his breaks. No more grabbing coffee from his favorite cafeteria spot. And then Jake caught a cold. It started with a scratchy throat. By the next morning, his voice was hoarse and raspy. When he showed up for his nightly humming session with Princess Velshera, the sound that came out was nothing like his normal voice. The effect on the princess was immediate. Her monitors started beeping warnings. Her light patterns became erratic. The medical staff rushed in, checking everything, but they all knew what the problem was. Jake's voice didn't have the right frequencies anymore. The cold had changed his vocal cords just enough to make them ineffective. "I'm sorry," Jake croaked. "I'm so sorry." Rachel ran every test she could think of. She gave Jake every medication in the station's pharmacy. She had him drink hot tea with honey, gargle salt water, rest his voice, steam his sinuses. Nothing worked fast enough. The cold was going to run its course, which meant Jake would be hoarse for at least 3 or 4 more days. The princess had maybe 2 days before her condition became critical. "We need to find another human with similar vocal characteristics," Rachel told the medical team. "There are 2 other humans on this station. We'll test them both." They tested Lieutenant Ryan Cooper from the security division. His voice was too deep, his frequencies all wrong. They tested Maintenance Chief Beth Sullivan. Her voice was too high-pitched, completely different from what the princess needed. "It has to be Jake," Rachel said, frustration clear in her voice. "His specific vocal range, his particular way of humming, even the songs he chooses, it all matters. We can't just substitute someone else." Coordinator Plex called another emergency meeting. Ambassador Thalera was there, along with the Vraxian delegation and half a dozen other species involved in the peace talks. "We need contingency plans," Plex said. "What if Morrison's condition doesn't improve? What if the princess—" "Don't," Jake interrupted, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't finish that sentence. I'll get better. I have to get better." But that night, lying in his fancy new quarters that felt nothing like home, Jake wondered if his body would cooperate. He'd never felt so helpless in his life. Everything, the princess's health, the peace treaty, maybe thousands of lives, all depended on his immune system working faster. And there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it except wait, drink tea, and hope that 4 days from now when his voice came back, it wouldn't be too late. The guard stood outside his door. The medical monitors tracked his vital signs. The galaxy's most important janitor tried to sleep while the weight of worlds pressed down on his chest. Jake's cold lasted 5 miserable days. 5 days of Rachel forcing him to drink orange juice by the gallon, of steaming his sinuses until his face felt like cooked meat, of sleeping 16 hours a day while the station held its breath waiting for his voice to return. On the morning of the 6th day he woke up and his throat didn't hurt. He tried humming a few bars of Ring of Fire, and the sound came out clear and smooth. Within an hour he was back in the medical wing humming for Princess Velshera. Her monitors stabilized almost immediately, her light patterns smoothing from chaotic red to peaceful blue. The medical staff practically sagged with relief. Jake hummed for 3 hours straight that first day, making up for lost time, his voice filling the corridor with old country songs that had somehow become the most important sound in the galaxy. But something had changed during those 5 days of uncertainty. Princess Velshera had sent a request through Coordinator Plex. She wanted to meet Jake properly, not just have him hum outside her door like some kind of human jukebox. She wanted to actually talk to him. Plex had stuttered objections about protocol and proper diplomatic channels, but the princess outranked everyone on the station. If she wanted to have tea with a janitor, she was going to have tea with a janitor. So on the 7th day, Jake found himself sitting in the princess's medical suite, wearing clean clothes that Rachel had forced him into, feeling completely out of place. The princess was smaller than he'd expected, her bioluminescent skin glowing a soft purple that reminded him of twilight back home in Tennessee. She was beautiful in a way that was completely alien but somehow still recognizable. "Thank you for coming, Jake Morrison," she said through the translation device that turned her light patterns into words he could understand. "I wanted to meet the man who saved my life without even knowing I existed. I was just doing my job, Your Highness. The humming thing was an accident." Her light flickered in a pattern Rachel had taught him meant amusement. "An accident that recreated the exact frequencies of my world's most sacred caves. Quite the fortunate accident." When you put it that way, I sound a lot more impressive than I actually am. Perhaps you don't give yourself enough credit. The princess's glow dimmed slightly. I understand someone tried to harm you because of what you do for me. That troubles me greatly. It's not your fault. Politics is messy everywhere, I guess. Even in space. Still, your life is in danger because of me. That's unacceptable. Jake shrugged. Your life was in danger just from being sick. That's also unacceptable. At least I can fight back with a mop handle. The princess's light brightened with what Jake was learning to recognize as laughter. The security reports said you actually used your cleaning equipment as a weapon. I found that both alarming and oddly admirable. It was more running away while swinging wildly, but sure, let's call it fighting. They talked for over an hour that first day and it became a regular thing. Jake would come in, hum for his required 2 hours and then stay to talk. The princess asked questions about Earth, about humans, about things Jake had never really thought about before. She wanted to know about families and friendships, about music and art, about why humans seem to find joy in the strangest things. Tell me about these songs you hum, she said during their third conversation. Rachel explained the concept of music, but I still don't fully understand. You create sound patterns that carry no information? Why? Jake leaned back in his chair, trying to figure out how to explain Johnny Cash to an alien princess who'd never heard music before. It's not about information. It's about feeling. My dad used to play these songs on long car rides when I was a kid. When I hear them now, I remember being 8 years old with my feet up on the dashboard, watching Tennessee roll past the window. The songs make me feel connected to those memories, to my dad, to home. Her light shifted to deep purple, which meant she was thinking hard about something. So humans embed memories and emotions into sound patterns that serve no communicative purpose? Exactly. We call it art. Kethri, don't have art, not the way you describe it. Our sounds always communicate something specific. Our light patterns convey information. Even our song caves, which are sacred to us, exist because we need them biologically. We never considered them beautiful or meaningful beyond their function. That sounds lonely, Jake said, then immediately worried he'd offended her. Sorry, I didn't mean. No, you're right. It is lonely. The princess's light dimmed. I've been away from my world for 8 months now. The negotiations, the constant pressure, the weight of preventing a war. I have advisors and guards and diplomats surrounding me constantly, but none of them are actually with me, if that makes sense. Everyone wants something from me. Treaty concessions, political favors, strategic advantages. You're the first person who talks to me like I'm just a person. Jake understood that feeling more than she knew. For what it's worth, I don't want anything from you except maybe for you to get healthy. And honestly, I kind of like our conversations. Makes the humming feel less weird. Over the next few weeks, their talks went deeper. Jake told her about growing up in Tennessee, about Friday night football games and fireflies in summer and his mama's terrible cooking that he'd give anything to taste one more time. He told her about swimming in creek water so cold it made your bones ache, about the way the mountains looked when fog rolled through them in the morning. The princess told him about Kethri culture, about a society where light and sound were interchangeable forms of communication, about the pressure of being born into royalty without ever having a choice about it. I envy you, she admitted one night. You chose this life. You chose to leave your world, to work here, to be invisible if that's what you wanted. I've never had choices. I was hatched into responsibility. Every decision I make affects millions of lives. Jake had been quiet for a moment, then decided to tell her something he'd never told anyone else on the station. I didn't choose this because I wanted adventure. I chose it because I was running away. Running from what? From failure, I guess. I went to Georgetown University. That's a big school on Earth for people who want to work in politics. International relations. I was going to be a diplomat, change the world, make my parents proud. Had this mentor, Professor Bennett, who was grooming me for the State Department. Then she got caught in a corruption scandal. Was she guilty? No, but it didn't matter. The investigation destroyed her career anyway. And I was her star student, her protege. Nobody in government wanted to touch me after that. I was radioactive, as we say. So I came out here, figured I'd be around diplomacy without being part of it. Be invisible, watch from the outside, clean up other people's messes without making any of my own. The princess's light pulsed thoughtfully. That must have been painful. Yeah, it was. Still is sometimes. But honestly, I've made peace with it. There's something satisfying about mopping. You clean something and it's clean. Simple. Honest. Not like politics where everything's complicated and messy and nothing ever really gets fixed. The peace speech I must give in 9 days, the princess said quietly. I'm terrified I'll fail. That I'm not wise enough or skilled enough. That I'll say the wrong thing and condemn thousands to continued war. Jake looked at her, this alien princess millions of miles from her home, carrying the weight of 2 civilizations on her shoulders, and saw something he recognized. Fear. The same fear he'd felt before his whole career had collapsed. You want help with the speech? Her light brightened with surprise. You're a janitor. I'm a janitor with a degree in international relations who spent years studying exactly this kind of thing. I know how diplomats think, how they talk, what arguments work and what don't. And I've spent 3 years watching them when they thought nobody important was looking. I know their tells, their weaknesses, their hot buttons. You're serious. Dead serious. Look, I may have run away from that world, but I still remember how it works. And if I can help prevent a war, it seems like a better use of my education than mopping floors. Though I'm still going to mop floors. I like mopping. The princess's light did that laughing flicker again. Jake Morrison, you are endlessly surprising. They worked on the speech every night after his humming sessions. Jake would sit with his old textbooks pulled up on a tablet, referencing diplomatic theory he'd thought he'd forgotten. The princess was brilliant. Her insights into Kethri-Ivraxian tensions were sharp and nuanced. Together they crafted something that was more than just words. It was hope translated into language that both sides could hear. The day of the peace summit arrived with more ceremony than Jake had seen in his entire 3 years on the station. The Grand Assembly Hall was packed with representatives from dozens of species, all of them dressed in whatever their culture considered formal attire. Kethri diplomats glowed in synchronized patterns, Vraxian officials released carefully controlled pheromones, and various other aliens communicated through methods Jake still didn't fully understand. Jake watched from a maintenance corridor. Old habits died hard. He'd found a spot where he could see the stage through a ventilation grate without being seen himself. Rachel had tried to get him a proper seat in the audience, but Jake had refused. This wasn't his world anymore. He was just a janitor who'd helped write a speech. The princess was the one who had to deliver it. He could see her backstage, her light patterns betraying her nervousness despite her composed posture. They'd worked on that speech every night for a week, refining every word, anticipating every objection, crafting arguments that would appeal to both Kethri pride and Vraxian pragmatism. Was good. Jake knew it was good. But knowing something intellectually and believing it in your gut were 2 different things. His communicator buzzed. A message from the princess, I'm terrified. Jake typed back quickly, you've got this. The speech is perfect. You're perfect. Just remember what we talked about. Speak from the heart, not just the script. I know. You've told me 18 times. 19th's the charm, Jake sent back, then added, I'll be watching. You're going to change the galaxy today. He watched as she walked onto the stage, her bioluminescence shifting to the formal patterns of Kethri royalty. The translation devices around the hall hummed to life, ready to convert her light-based communication into forms the other species could understand. Princess Velshera began the speech exactly as they'd written it. She talked about the cost of war, not in abstract terms but in real numbers. How many Kethri children had lost parents? How many Vraxian colonies had been destroyed? How much resources both civilizations had poured into weapons instead of medicine, into battleships instead of exploration, into hatred instead of progress. Jake felt his chest tighten with pride. She was nailing it. Every word, every pause, every carefully constructed argument landed perfectly. He could see it in the way the audience leaned forward, in the subtle shifts of alien body language that meant they were listening, really listening. Then she went off script. There is a human saying, the princess said, her light pulsing with warmth that the translators rendered as gentle emotion. No act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. A human on this station taught me that. Jake's heart stopped. Oh no. Please don't. He never sought recognition. Never asked for reward. He simply did his job and in doing so saved my life. He showed me that the smallest actions can change the fate of empires. A janitor humming old songs while he cleaned became the difference between war and peace, between my death and my survival. The audience murmured, or did whatever their species did to express surprise. Jake wanted to crawl into the ventilation shaft and disappear forever. This treaty is our small action, the princess continued. Signing these documents today won't instantly end centuries of mistrust. It won't erase the pain of loss or heal old wounds overnight. But it's a beginning. And beginnings matter. They matter because every journey starts with a single step. Every peace starts with a single choice. Every friendship starts with a single conversation. She talked about meeting Jake, about learning that humans created something called music for no practical reason except to feel connected to their memories and emotions. About how that concept had seemed alien to her at first, but now she understood it. Peace wasn't just about strategic advantages or trade agreements. It was about creating space for different species to learn from each other, to share their strange and beautiful ways of seeing the universe. The applause was overwhelming when she finished. Bioluminescent flares, harmonic vibrations, chemical releases of approval from a dozen different species all happening at once. The Kethrii and Vraxian delegations stood, and within an hour the treaty was signed. Jake tried to slip away before anyone noticed him, but Rachel caught him in the corridor. "Jake Morrison, trying to sneak off after your big moment?" "It wasn't my moment. It was hers. She mentioned you by name in front of the entire Galactic Diplomatic Corps. You're famous now. Again." "Yeah, well, fame and I don't really get along." That's when Coordinator Plex found them, his tentacles waving with barely contained excitement. "Morrison, the Kethrii Empire has made an official offer. They want you as the princess's permanent frequency specialist. The salary package is extraordinary, enough to retire on after just 5 years. Full diplomatic status, your own quarters on the Kethrii homeworld, access to—" "No," Jake said. Plex's tentacles froze mid-wave. "No? Did you hear the amount?" "I heard it. Still no. But why?" Jake thought about how to explain it. "Because I like my life. I like mopping at 3 in the morning while humming Johnny Cash. I like the quiet. I like being invisible, or at least I liked it before all this happened. And the princess doesn't need me there in person. I'll record myself humming every song I know. She can use the recordings whenever she needs them. So can any other Kethrii who needs help. But I'm not leaving my job." Rachel grinned. "What if I told you I need you for something else? That paper on human vocalization in xenomedicine? I want you as co-author. Turns out your voice has helped 43 Kethrii recover from frequency deprivation syndrome. We're revolutionizing xenobiology, and I need someone who understands both the human side and the practical applications. Will I still get to mop?" "Jake, you can mop whenever you want. But yes, you'll also be consulting with xenobiologists across the galaxy. Teaching them about the unexpected medical applications of things as simple as humming. You'll be changing lives, Jake. You already have been." Jake thought about it. "Okay. But I'm keeping my janitor title. Jake Morrison, janitor and xenobiological consultant. That's got a nice ring to it." Princess Velshera left the station 2 weeks later, her health fully restored. The night before she departed, she came to find Jake during his shift. He was mopping the observation deck, humming Waylon Jennings, when her light illuminated the corridor behind him. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," she said. "You're going to do great things," Jake told her. "The treaty is just the beginning. I've started a cultural exchange program between Earth and Kethrii. I want my people to understand this thing you call music. To learn that sound can be more than communication. It can be art, memory, emotion. You taught me that. I just hummed some old songs. You did so much more than that." Her light pulsed with warmth. "You reminded me that there's no such thing as an unimportant person. Only people whose importance we fail to recognize. Thank you, my friend." 6 months later, Jake was still mopping the Celestial Harmonies corridors on the night shift. Still humming the same old country songs his daddy had taught him. But now he spent his days consulting with scientists, teaching workshops on human vocalization, and co-authoring papers that were changing how the galaxy understood cross-species medicine. His recordings had helped hundreds of Kethrii. Universities were studying the Morrison effect, the phenomenon of human vocal frequencies matching alien biological needs. He'd received job offers from a dozen research facilities, all of which he'd politely declined. Late one night, pushing his mop bucket past the observation deck, Jake's communicator chimed. A message from Princess Velshera, sent from light years away. "Still falling asleep to your version of Ring of Fire. My advisors think I'm strange for preferring recordings of a human janitor to our finest frequency specialists. I told them they're missing the point entirely. By the way, the first human Kethrii musical collaboration happened yesterday. A jazz singer from New Orleans performed in our song Caves. It was transcendent. Thank you for showing us that the universe is bigger and stranger and more beautiful than we ever imagined." Jake smiled, pocketed the communicator, and started humming Tennessee Whiskey as he mopped. Somewhere across the galaxy, a princess who'd become his friend would fall asleep to his voice. Tomorrow, thousands of beings would live in peace partly because a janitor had been in the right place humming the right song at exactly the right time. He'd thought he was running away when he took this job. Thought he was hiding from a failed career and broken dreams. Turned out he'd just been taking the long way around to finding where he actually belonged. The galaxy was full of important people doing important things. Diplomats and scientists and warriors and leaders. But sometimes, just sometimes, the most important person in the room was the one nobody noticed. The one who cleaned the floors and hummed old songs and reminded everyone that simple kindness could change everything. Jake finished mopping the observation deck and stood for a moment, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, his voice was helping aliens he'd never meet. His friendship with a princess had sparked a cultural revolution. His refusal to give up on a simple job had prevented a war. Not bad for a janitor from Tennessee. He picked up his mop bucket and headed toward the next corridor, humming as he went. Tomorrow he'd wake up, attend a xenobiology conference, teach a workshop on vocal frequency patterns and maybe grab lunch with Rachel. Then he'd sleep, wake up at 10 p.m. and start his shift all over again. Same bucket. Same mop. Same songs. Same Jake. And honestly, he wouldn't have it any other way.